I'm your host, Brian Callanan. State lawmakers have wrapped up their 2024 session, but could face some major challenges in a matter of months. With more than 1,000 bills circulating through the state capitol this year, 6 citizen initiatives stood out.
The initiatives were a game changer in this short session this year.
The legislature passed 3 of the Republican-backed measures. A Bill of Rights for parents of school kids, a ban on a state income tax, and a rollback on restrictions for police pursuits.
And this is one step, an important step, but only one step to get us back in the right direction.
Voters will decide on the 3 remaining initiatives this fall, whether to eliminate the capital gains tax, whether to make the state's long-term care plan optional, and whether to repeal the Climate Commitment Act.
If you remove that initiative, you increase pollution in the state of Washington.
Democrats pushed through a plan to speed up Puget Sound Energy's transition away from natural gas. And there was bipartisan support for more co-living units statewide.
It's definitely an affordable way to be able to continue to live in a healthy, small home.
But proposals to cap annual rent hikes and expand housing near transit did not make the final cut.
The legislature is adjourned.
With the short session over and a big election season ahead, the work for lawmakers and voters is just beginning.
This budget was not wild and crazy.
Where's the money coming from, both to fight these initiatives and to pass them?
You had some House lawmakers who just couldn't understand why adding liquor to a strip club would make a strip club safer.
We get the scoop from our panel of reporters from Olympia, next on City Inside Out. Well, welcome once again to City Inside Out. I'm Brian Callanan, and I have with me a crew of Olympia correspondents to help break down some of these topics, including Jeanie Lindsay. She is a state government reporter for the Northwest News Network. You'll probably hear on KUOW and a number of other NPR stations. Jeanie, good to have you.
Yeah, happy to be here.
We also have with us Paul Queary, the editor and publisher of the Washington Observer. Paul, good to see you too.
I'm glad to be with you.
Great. And then Grace Deng is here. She is a reporter for the Washington State Standard. Grace, good to have you as well.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's do this thing. Paul, let me start with you if I could. I wanted to ask about the initiatives that really seemed to dominate this short 60-day session. There were 6 of them, backed by Republicans. 3 ended up getting passed by the legislature. 3 will go to a public vote. I don't think I've ever seen this tactic before where a lawmaker like Representative Jim Walsh, state GOP chair, uses one of his major donors, Brian Haywood, cranks out a big slate of initiatives, and then has this much of an impact on a short session. What did you make of how all this came together?
That was really unprecedented. And together, those initiatives really represent a rollback of most of the agenda of the Democratic majority in the legislature and Governor Jay Inslee, if they were to all to pass. The 3 that passed were really kind of the least consequential of the 3, although the police pursuit law certainly is a very, very serious matter.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really, in some ways, kind of innovative use of the initiative process to kind of try and reassert some sort of control. Republicans have been on the outside looking in for kind of a while now in Olympia, and this is a way for them to use a different tactic to achieve their aims. And, we'll see if it pans out. It's panned out pretty well for them so far. We'll see how it goes in November.
So far. Thank you very much for that. And just working off of that, lawmakers passed 3 of these measures. This was a Bill of Rights for parents, for school kids, a ban on a state income tax, and this rollback of the restrictions on police pursuits that the legislature passed a few years ago. Jeanie, I wanted to get into this with you. Why would Democrats, the majority in Olympia, say, yes, we're going to approve these 3 conservative-backed measures? Why did they do that?
Yeah, it was kind of surprising. I definitely was surprised when they started to move forward with the 3 that they did. But as I talked with more folks, it was clear that they were sort of trying to be strategic about it, right? Because Democrats are the most threatened by the 3 that are going to the ballot in November because they will have huge financial costs to the state.
We will get into those in a minute.
Yeah. And so by passing these 3, there's a couple of things that they're going to do with that. They're going to reduce the number of measures that are on ballots this fall, and Washington voters' ballots are already going to be stacked with so much. But they also get to maintain more control over the law, because by enacting these initiatives into law, if there are any issues that lawmakers and Democrats are super unhappy with, particularly around the Parents' Bill of Rights, or if they want to make more adjustments to police pursuits, they can come back in 2025 and make changes. But if voters had enacted these initiatives, there basically would be a supermajority block around the underlying law for the first 2 years. So it's just giving them more flexibility to address any issues that might arise from these proposals that Democrats aren't really super excited about, but enough didn't have a problem with, and they're looking ahead of the long-term strategy.
Yeah, Grace, what do you got?
Oh, I was just going to add that the Standard spoke to Republican leadership as part of their kind of routine. They speak with every news outlet. And one of the things that one of my colleagues asked about was if they're worried about police pursuits coming up again and Democrats changing the police pursuit law yet again and rolling back some of the rollbacks that they did.
Right.
So what Jeanie was saying about how it's about giving the Democrats more control, that's absolutely something that the Republicans are worried about.
Okay. And maybe I can stick with you, Grace, and talk a little bit about the measures that we will be voting on this November. Whether or not to repeal the capital gains tax. Maybe I can start there. Whether or not to repeal the Climate Commitment Act, whether to make Washington's Long-Term Care Act optional. Actually, let me start with that Climate Commitment Act. And Grace, let me ask you about this. This is a signature issue for Governor Inslee. He's leaving office this fall after 3 terms. How do you see this battle shaping up over I-2117? The future of our climate, the cost of a gallon of gas, a lot to talk about here. Where do you see this debate heading?
I'm going to be honest, I don't cover that. I think you would probably want to ask Jeanie or Paul.
Okay.
I will say, though, that Governor Inslee is extremely passionate about the Climate Commitment Act. You ask him anything to do with the Climate Commitment Act or environment in general, and he will talk to you for however long he's allowed to before his staff pull you away. So it's definitely something that gets him passionate.
Anyone else want to jump in on the CCA?
I think that the really interesting thing there is going to be who turns out to fight over that initiative. Because when a previous carbon pricing scheme was on the ballot back in 2018, the oil companies spent an absolute boatload of money defeating it. But now that the Climate Commitment Act is in place, there's a lot of money to be made in the green energy field. And there's a sense that a lot of these players, including some of the oil companies themselves, see a better future for themselves with the Climate Commitment Act. So what I'm tracking, and we follow the money pretty closely at the Observer, and what I'm tracking is sort of where's the money coming from, both to fight these initiatives and to pass them. And I'm already seeing some, sort of environmentalist billionaire money flowing into the no campaign on that. And I haven't seen a lot of money on the other side yet. I mean, Brian Haywood put up a lot of money to get those things on the ballot. But the fall campaign will cost, well north of $10 million. And we haven't seen that money yet.
Interesting. And when you talk about this Cap and Invest auction bringing in $1.8 billion last year to the state, that's a lot of money we're talking about.
People were making money off of that.
Yeah, for sure. Jeanie, if I could, I'd like to move on to the capital gains tax question here, I-2109. This brought in nearly $900 million in its first year, which was over projections, I should point out. $500 million of that goes towards education and childcare. But there were more than 400,000 people in our state who signed the petition that said, we want to repeal this. What's this debate going to look like?
Yeah, I think that Washington's conversation just about taxation generally, I mean, a lot of the ire that was aimed towards the capital gains tax is really about, the wording that was used around it. I mean, for folks who might not remember, this was a capital gains tax that was decided by the state Supreme Court.
That's right.
Deciding whether it was a tax on income and property, which there are a ton of rules around in Washington state, versus an excise tax. So I think that just the concerns about taxation generally is going to be baked into this, but also the idea of driving away people who are creating jobs. I mean, Jeff Bezos just left Washington state, and there are folks who are pointing to the capital gains tax as something to blame for that. Now, whether that's true or not is, to be determined or never to be determined. I don't know. But I think just the conversation about the impact of, some of these economy drivers, and then just the conversation about the volatility of this tax at all. A lot of folks point to how, this money is tagged for schools and
That's
early
right.
learning,
Yeah.
but it could change so much depending on what people's, what people are doing with their capital gains. I think just the conversation around taxation broadly, but also about how this could or not, change Washington's economy and just the questions around what its effect really is.
Yeah, we always talk a lot about the most regressive economy in the U.S. in terms of states, and I would love to see where that goes. Anyone else want to jump in on capital gains?
I think that there's a couple of really interesting things there. One is the sort of camel's nose argument. Right now, that tax is focused on the very wealthiest Washingtonians.
Yes, right.
And the people who are fighting it, think that that's going to be in their favor. That the money's going for education and child care, and it's coming from a relative handful of millionaires and
small amount of people. Yeah.
But the camel's nose argument would, suggest that maybe it gets expanded.
I see.
And you start to go down the economic ladder a little bit to, garden variety rich people or merely affluent people, and then all of a sudden you start to bring in a lot more people, and that's I think that's what that fight's going to be about.
See, they can't make the argument that there's going to be an income tax coming from it because I guess we already put a ban on that. So we'll see where we go with that one. Paul, I wanted to stick with you.
Most aggressive.
We'll see where we go. Paul, let me talk about this idea of allowing people to opt out of Washington Cares, our state's long-term care plan. So I-2124 supporters of Washington Cares would say this plan will wither away if you let people opt out of it. Republicans say it's too expensive. Some people may pay into it, never even need it. Where do you see this debate going?
So I think this is, perhaps the most interesting of the tax, because this tax hits pretty much everybody who gets a paycheck.
Yep.
And it's a line on your pay stub. Not that most people get, paper pay stubs anymore.
Right.
So, people might be fired up about that. But the supporters of it, which is mostly the local of the Service Employees International Union that represents long-term care workers, they make a pretty cogent argument that this money is really necessary to provide long-term care for people who just can't afford it at the end of their lives, which is a really large percentage of the population.
Yeah.
But at the same time, people at the other end of the economic spectrum, and most people who own homes or have significant savings, can sort of self-insure against this at the end of their lives.
Yeah, right.
And for them, this is just a tax that pays for something that they're really not going to use.
Yeah. It's going to be an interesting one. I know it was tough to get this thing through the legislature even to start with. Grace, let me jump to you. I want to talk about some of the things that have passed and didn't pass in this session here. And one priority for progressive lawmakers was this push to get unemployment benefits for striking workers. This bill didn't end up having the votes. What's this bill about? What happened here?
Yeah, so this bill would have given unemployment insurance to workers on strike following, I think it's the first Sunday of the second. It was more than a week. About a week to 2 weeks. And the idea was, let's make sure that workers on strike are taken care of, that they have rent and food when they're on strike. And the argument from the opposing side, from the business industry, was that it would tip the scales in the balance of the striking workers and not the industry, and that there's a fragile balance there, and that it would put a strain on the unemployment insurance system, which, the Washington State Labor Council said that it would actually, only be less than 1% of UI claims during one of these major strikes. So a strike of over like 1,000 people or more, which does not happen very often.
True.
More so in recent years, but really not often. And when I spoke to Senator Kaiser, who was the lead sponsor in the Senate where it failed, she said that she was so close that she could taste it. But it was just a short session. They always use the excuse, right, that it's a short session, that people aren't familiar with the legislation. This is the first time. But it was really interesting because I really, I thought it had a better chance than it did in California, where this has also been, suggested, because in California, the UI system is kind of in shambles. And our system is pretty robust. So it's not like our system can't, or at least in my opinion, it's not like our system can't afford it.
I see.
I think it's more about the politics, and it'll be interesting to see if it gets brought back next session.
Yeah, with Kaiser leaving.
Yeah, with Kaiser leaving.
That's going to be a very interesting twist. Did you have something to say, Paul?
I think actually that the climate is likely to get better for that bill rather than worse. At least two of the no votes among the Democratic caucus, or the potential no votes, it did never come up for a vote in the Senate, are not going to be back in the Senate next year. And at least one of those is likely to be replaced by somebody who would vote yes on the bill. So if it was only a vote or two short, things might get better for it. And in general, Labor's star is kind of on the rise in Olympia. So, we'll see what happens next year.
We shall see. Jeanie, I wanted to ask you about a bigger question here, the overall state budget, before we get into some of these individual issues here. So Democrats tied hundreds of millions of dollars from the Climate Commitment Act to measures like utility credits for lower income people, some of the state ferry projects too. So definitely some political work behind the scenes there. You think about the CCA getting repealed, that's going to get very interesting. But talk about that if you'd like. I just wanted to get some of the highlight areas of where the state wants to spend taxpayer dollars this year.
Yeah, the CCA money is sort of sprinkled across all of the budgets that they pass, because they passed the big operating budget, which is programs and services, transportation, construction. So CCA money is sort of throughout that. The state already has some of those dollars. And so the way that they wrote some of these line items in the budget is that they won't go into effect until 2025, January 1st, so that if the cap and trade system does get repealed and that money goes away, they sort of are earmarking which things won't happen.
Oh, okay.
So they're sort of building it in that way. But as far as big picture, the other money that they're using, not CCA, a lot of it is going towards behavioral health. They, included money in this budget for pay raises for school employees. There's been a lot of talk about paraeducators specifically, special education. There's also been some more money toward the Housing Trust Fund. So, this budget was not wild and crazy, but it was, still focusing for and moving forward on some of those core issues around behavioral health, education, housing, things like that this session that they'll probably keep building on next year.
I would imagine so. Paul, I'll go to you here. I wanted to talk about one of the last bills to come out of the legislature this session, this move to help Puget Sound Energy transition its customers from gas to electricity. This one I know has a lot of controversy behind it, and Democrats were not all in agreement about it, barely got enough votes to get through the House. What's the story with this bill?
Well, that bill is mostly aimed at allowing Puget Sound Energy to change its rate so it recoups the cost of the existing gas network more quickly. And they want to do that because they see some of the other laws that have been passed in recent years, the Clean Energy Transformation Act, which passed in 2019, and the Climate Commitment Act, as driving up their costs for gas, and also putting significant emissions restrictions on their power mix in general, and they see this as a trend away from gas toward electricity as their path to complying with those laws, and that's one of the reasons they wanted this. It was initially very controversial when it was introduced last year because it contemplated that they would stop building new gas infrastructure. It would have been this year. Actually, it would have been last year. That was taken out this year, as well as there was a provision in the bill early on this year that would have allowed Puget Sound Energy to satisfy their obligation to serve by providing electricity instead of gas. And that was taken out as well. But opponents still don't like it. It contemplates that gas will be much more expensive in the future, and that would have the effect of forcing a lot of people to kind of retool their houses and businesses to use electricity instead of gas, which is an expensive proposition.
It is. That's a battle ahead. Yeah, for sure. Grace, I want to jump back to you for another worker issue, if I could. Some new workplace standards for strippers in the state of Washington. I never thought I'd see a stripper pole out in front of the state state capitol building.
Certainly the most fun protest I've ever been
to. Strip our clothes, not our pay. Apparently this worked. What is this bill going to do? Let's talk about it.
Yeah, so it, to be clear, strippers have been asking for legal liquor in strip clubs. Washington State is the only state in the entire country where there's not legal liquor in some form in strip clubs. And they say that this creates a situation where the strippers are the only source of revenue for a club. So it creates a situation where you have club owners exploiting them. charging them exorbitant fees to get up on stage,
Right.
and then they end up leaving in debt to those club owners. So the idea is if you have liquor, there's another source of income. They're less likely to be exploited. The bill also covers a wide-ranging list of workplace protections, training, having security officers, things like that. But the strippers I talked to said that without legal liquor, if they put these workplace protections in place, the club owners might, throw up their hands and say, "Well, now I can't afford it.
How am I going to pay for that?
How can I pay to have a strip club?"
Yeah.
And so this legal liquor situation was something that was kind of a ride or die situation for them, where they were like, "We need to pass it with legal liquor," and that was a huge. That was a huge controversy, especially in the House, because you had some House lawmakers who just couldn't understand why adding liquor to a strip club would make a strip club safer for these workers. And so at the start, they were saying, let's pass this House bill without the liquor stuff, and we'll go to the Liquor and Cannabis Board. But then the Liquor and Cannabis Board—
They came right back.
Came right back, and they were like, we think that only the legislature can do this. And then a really interesting thing happened where the lewd conduct rules became a situation. And so just to explain the background there, Seattle had several queer bars, gay bars get raided. Well, advocates say it was raids. Police say that we were just checking it out.
Yeah, we're working with the LCB, right? Yeah,
we're with the LCB.
Yeah.
And this created, this was an uproar in the LGBTQ community because it felt like they felt like they were being targeted.
Yeah.
And so it became politically necessary for the legislature to say, we need to repeal these lewd conduct rules. With those lewd conduct rules come rules that basically prevent strip clubs from having liquor in them, such as nudity. And if you have nudity, if you have people next to each other, if you have a customer and a performer, like from this amount of distance,
right.
you can't have liquor in your establishment. And so the House ended up passing basically overturning these lewd conduct rules. And as a result of that, we now have a pathway to potentially having liquor in strip clubs. And so this is a very roundabout way of getting there. But at the end of the day, I talked to Madison Zakwu, who leads Strippers Are Workers, the grassroots group that's been pushing for this. And she said, we are so happy. It's everything that we wanted.
Yeah, I'm interested, and thank you for teaching me so many things about strippers. I appreciate that. Yeah, Paul.
And I think that that's going to be really interesting to watch how that plays out, because they directed the Liquor and Cannabis Board to repeal the lewd conduct rule entirely.
Right.
And that rule isn't a ban on liquor in strip clubs, it's a ban on stripping in bars.
Right.
And so what the actual consequences of that down the road are, I think are going to be really fun to watch. I think the Liquor and Cannabis Board were meeting on that topic today.
They seem rather, frustrated with the legislature. And if you look at what they've told reporters, they were saying, well, we would have preferred that they pass the Senate version because the Senate version makes a clear pathway to liquor in strip clubs, whereas this is just a complete repeal, and now they have to start from scratch.
I need to pick up the pace a little bit, but Jeanie, I wanted to talk about the rise and fall of the rent stabilization bill. I know you covered this. It would have capped rent hikes at 7% annually, but wouldn't apply to new buildings or when new renters come in. What happened here? Is this bill coming back? What do we got?
The bill will be back for sure. So this year it was the latest version of it. The rent stabilization conversation in Olympia is not totally new. This concept has been proposed before. So this year was the furthest that it's ever gone. But yeah, it just did not have a path forward in the Senate. I mean, the Senate version stalled out in the Housing Committee when Senator Annette Cleveland ultimately withheld her vote from passing that bill out of committee the day it needed to go. And then when the House bill came over to the Senate, Democrats decided, we're not going to send this back to Housing to die. We're going to send it to the Ways and Means Committee, hopefully giving it a chance to get some more faces behind it, get more people looking at it. But there were two senators in that committee who also didn't support it, and they will not be coming back. So rent stabilization conversation is likely to be a lot different next session. But this year it just had a few key people that were not on board with it.
Got it. Paul, another brief conversation, if I could. The legislature did pass a measure allowing for more co-living situations in our house, these single-room occupancy units. But then again, they couldn't pass a measure encouraging more development near transit. You've written about housing policy so much at the state level. What was your takeaway from this session?
Yeah, and I should give a plug to my guy Tim Groover, who is our main housing housing reporter. But yeah, those bills are both really interesting. I mean, the co-housing thing was mostly a thing in Seattle, and longtime Seattleites will remember that the city council effectively banned it kind of a long time ago over various complaints about those. So it's interesting to see the legislature essentially come back and pave them over. The transit-oriented development bill, I think there were sort of two issues surrounding that bill. One is there's a lot of smaller cities on the mass transit network that are uneasy about this. And there was both passive and active resistance to the bill from those communities. And the other is that there was a fight, kind of an internal fight among supporters about how much what kind of requirements for affordable housing needed to be baked into these projects. The low-income housing folks wanted a really substantial percentage dedicated to to folks of lesser means. And the sort of the property development friendly lawmakers were arguing that those projects just don't pencil out very well when you put those kinds of requirements on them. So that's. That fight's probably going to continue. I mean, those sides are pretty entrenched on those issues, I think.
We will see what happens next session, but we do need to wrap up. Thank you for this discussion. Grace, a story maybe from the Capitol we haven't talked about, a headline you're paying close attention to, the 20-second version if you can.
I would say what is happening at the Tacoma ICE facility, the federal privately run facility where the state is trying to inspect the facility under House Bill 1470, which passed in 2023, Representative Lillian Ortiz-Self, and it would bring more oversight to this facility that has a long list and history of reported human rights violations, and that is currently playing out in court. Whether a federal court has given them a preliminary injunction siding with the private company, and so currently state inspectors aren't able to access the facility.
Wow, big immigration story there. Thank you for that. Jeanie, something we haven't covered, 20-second version if you can.
Yeah, there's a couple of prison resentencing bills that didn't make it this session, and I've been covering those in the lead up to the legislative session, and now I'll be following up with folks who have a stake in that conversation about why it didn't happen and where that leaves us now.
All right, looking forward to hearing that. Paul, some final thoughts here?
I think one of the interesting bills that failed this year was the medical mergers bill, which contemplated a whole new layer of regulatory authority for the Attorney General over the healthcare sector. That passed the Senate and then kind of ground down in the House in the final days. We'd have to imagine that we're going to see that issue again because it sort of has issues of abortion rights access and gender affirming care access, and then also there's a lot of folks who want that kind of thing because they're concerned about just consolidation in the healthcare space in general, and so I think that's one to watch.
We will see what happens next. Thank you all, and we will be right back. What are people saying online about the 2024 legislative session? One person writes, "The legislature's budget investments reflect the state's dedication to addressing critical issues such as education and substance use disorder." Another person comments, "Dems have safe majorities in the Washington legislature. Yet the Washington GOP set the agenda in Olympia this year, and Dems got barely anything done." We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on social media. Great to have that input, and a big thanks to our panel for your input too. We will see you next time on City Inside Out.